Welcome back. In 2023, the number was 118. 118 law enforcement officers killed while protecting and serving the citizens of their communities. Sadly, data just released in the past few days shows that number going up in 2024. The National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund, which tracks officer deaths, reports that 147 officers died in the line of duty in 2024. Troy Anderson is the executive director of the Officer Safety and Wellness Program at that organization. He joins us this morning. Troy, thank you for being with us. You don't want one, right? And 118 in 2023 is too many. But to see a 25% increase from 23 to 24 up to 147 lives lost, what do you make of that number?
Well, the numbers are jarring, and I think what it really should do is cause not just the law enforcement community, but the community as a whole to really pause and take a deeper dive into these numbers. And these aren't just numbers. Behind every one of those numbers is a man or a woman who signed up to do a job that they genuinely loved and died doing a job that they loved. So we really have kind of a twofold mission here. It's not enough just to report on the data of what is killing America's law enforcement officers, but equally as important to us is to look at each one of these cases individually and come up with a solutions piece, if possible, if it's an avoidable death, to really kind of figure out an approach nationally to how we can drive those numbers down to zero. And from our officer safety and wellness standpoint, it's really twofold. Number one is to make it safer for those who serve. And the second part to that is to keep the names off the memorial wall. So that really is our drive. As we look at these numbers, they're startling numbers. They've certainly fluctuated over the years. We had a super high year in 2021. It was 581 names. So that's come down significantly. But in this last year, to see a 25% uptick across the nation is just simply, it's too much.
Well, like you say, each one of those people whose names will be added to the memorial is someone's father, or mother, or husband or wife, and one of those, of course, being a Connecticut State Trooper. And I want to talk about that in a second. But the number one cause of death in your study and looking at the statistics was gunfire this year. 52 men and women lost their lives to gunfire. And what struck me, and tell me your thoughts, of the gunfire, your report breaks them down. The number one way for an officer to lose their life to gunfire was during traffic enforcement. And I know, and I've been scolded by police officers for saying it, nothing is routine. But what's more routine than traffic enforcement as a police officer? And yet many people who lost their lives to gunfire, it happened during a traffic stop.
Absolutely. And I appreciate that you said exactly that. And I think far too often people misuse that term routine traffic stop. There is nothing routine in law enforcement at all. And I think one of the things that we've recognized when we look at officer fatalities is also that complacency kills. So if you make your first traffic stop, you're remembering all of the training that you're reverting to from the academy and what your field training officer taught you. But over a period of time, I think we tend to take for granted that we're stopping really good men and women on the road who are genuinely just trying to get from point A to point B, and you're trying to take some corrective action. But I think, unfortunately, far too often we've seen that could take, a very grave turn, and it's for a number of reasons. And certainly on the side of the road, traffic stops are very dangerous. They're dangerous because you're the positioning of your vehicle. There are cars going by at highway speeds. Your approach, your equipment, your training, all of this comes into becomes a huge factor in what you're doing. And are you utilizing all of those things? So, I mean, one of the things that really kind of strikes me whenever I look at law enforcement as a whole around the country, and I travel around the country training and speaking with law enforcement rank and file folks all the time, is that there are still folks that are not wearing ballistic protection. This is something that is issued to everybody in this nation at this point. You need to wear your ballistic protection. You need to revert back to your training. You need to remember passenger side approach. You need to remember covering concealment. And I think that, as you so eloquently put when you're talking about, there are no routine stops, and each one of those stops is completely different. So I think it's very important for law enforcement as a whole to remember that during those traffic stops. And also, especially as we look at some of the traffic fatalities that happen on the highways, you need to really look also at struck by crashes. So many officers, we've seen a huge uptick in this over the years of officers being struck. Now, whether that's because they're distracted drivers, drunk drivers, regardless of what it is, drowsy drivers, every state has a move over law. when you see an officer or a first responder on the side of the road engaged in an official action, their lights are activated, safely move over a lane, slow down, pay attention, look for hand signs. They may be stopping traffic, they may be diverting traffic. You got to pay attention. And that's not just the traffic stops, that's in construction zones, that's in traffic stops, construction, like I said, whatever's happening, it is incredibly important to move over and pay attention.
Well, and you led right into it. Aaron Pelletier, a Connecticut State Trooper, whose name will be added to that memorial at the ceremony coming up pretty soon later this year, is who. That is exactly what happened with him. It was a situation during being hit by another driver while he was out of his cruiser, and the idea that that is such a dangerous part of it. The number 48% increase in those traffic deaths, 17 struck by deaths. The average age of a lost law enforcement officer, 42 years, and 14 years of seniority. So these aren't rookies who don't know what they're doing. Like you said, maybe complacency. We only have about 30 seconds left, Troy. Obviously, the police community can hear some of those things you talked about, wearing their vests, being careful with stops. What do you want the general public to take from this report in the last 30 seconds?
I want them to understand the service and sacrifice that law enforcement officers make across this country every single day. They are heroes that are out there protecting their community. We know that when the officers are safer, the community is safer, and they are trying to do a job. Respect that job and respect the work that they do. And if you get a chance, you have an opportunity, and it's not an emergency situation, go out of your way, thank those officers for what they do.
Well, 24,000 names on that memorial to date. Another 147 from the lives lost in 2024 will be added. Troy Anderson, thank you so much for being with us. It's important work, and hopefully our viewers will be thinking about those when they see an officer out on the road or on the highway patrolling. We appreciate you being with us.
Thanks so much for having me.